The blood-stained letter trembled in Bethany Zimmerman's hands as she stood alone on the vast, empty prairie, the setting sun casting long shadows across the tall grass that swayed in the relentless wind. It had been 3 days since the stagecoach attack that had claimed the lives of her aunt and uncle, leaving her stranded in this desolate stretch of Wyoming Territory, with nothing but a carpet bag, containing her few belongings and the crushing weight of terror that pressed upon her chest. It was 1878, and Bethany had journeyed west from Boston after the death of her parents, hoping to start anew with her only remaining relatives who had settled near Cheyenne. Now, at 22 years of age, she found herself utterly alone, having buried her loved ones in shallow graves marked only by crude wooden crosses fashioned from broken stagecoach parts. The distant howl of a wolf sent a shiver down her spine. Night was approaching, and with it came the bitter cold of early autumn on the high plains. Bethany's once fine traveling dress was torn and stained, her boots scuffed beyond recognition. Her honey-blonde hair, which had been neatly pinned beneath her bonnet when she'd begun her journey, now hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. She crumpled the letter, the one her uncle had been carrying with directions to their homestead, and shoved it back into her pocket. According to the stagecoach driver, before the bandits had killed him too, they were still a day's journey from her uncle's claim. Without a horse or provisions, that might as well have been 1,000 miles. The wind picked up, carrying with it the first bite of evening chill. Bethany gathered what little dry brush she could find and attempted to start a fire using the matches she'd found in her uncle's coat pocket. Her hands shook violently, either from cold or fear, she couldn't tell which anymore. After 3 failed attempts, a small flame finally caught. Bethany huddled close to the meager warmth, drawing her knees to her chest and wrapping her arms around them. She had never felt so utterly abandoned, so completely vulnerable. Every rustle in the grass made her heart race, imagining bandits returning to finish what they'd started or wild animals coming to claim her as their next meal. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face as darkness enveloped the prairie. The vast emptiness that had seemed so beautiful from the stagecoach window now felt oppressive and threatening. The stars emerged overhead, countless and cold, offering light but no comfort. Bethany had never been particularly religious, but that night she prayed fervently to whatever God might be listening. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares of gunshots and screams. When dawn finally broke, Bethany was already awake, her body stiff and aching from the hard ground. She ate the last of the dried beef from her uncle's provisions and took careful sips from her nearly empty canteen. Rising to her feet, she gazed across the endless sea of grass, trying to determine which direction to walk. The stagecoach had been traveling northwest when the attack occurred. According to her uncle's letter, their homestead lay in that same direction, near a creek that fed into the North Platte River. With trembling resolve, Bethany gathered her belongings and began walking, using the morning sun as her guide. Each step felt heavier than the last, her city boots wholly unsuited for the rugged terrain. By midday, blisters had formed on her heels and toes, but she pressed on, driven by the knowledge that to stop meant certain death. The sun climbed higher, beating down with merciless intensity. Bethany's lips cracked from dehydration, and her vision began to blur at the edges. Still, she continued, one painful step after another, until her legs simply gave out beneath her. She collapsed in a patch of tall grass, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The canteen was empty now, and hunger gnawed at her belly. Closing her eyes against the harsh sunlight, Bethany wondered if this was how she would die alone and forgotten on the vast American frontier. A sound penetrated her haze of exhaustion, the rhythmic thudding of hooves against the earth. At first, she thought it was another hallucination, like the voices she'd been hearing for the past hour. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. Summoning her last reserves of strength, Bethany pushed herself up on her elbows and peered through the grass. A rider approached from the west, the silhouette of man and horse dark against the afternoon sky. Fear and hope warred within her it could be salvation or further danger. As the rider drew nearer, Bethany could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders squared beneath a worn leather vest. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, and a rifle was secured in a scabbard attached to his saddle. Bethany tried to call out, but her parched throat produced only a hoarse whisper. Desperate, she grabbed her handkerchief, once white, now stained with dirt and tears, and waved it weakly above the grass. The rider slowed his approach, clearly having spotted her. Bethany's heart pounded against her ribs as he dismounted with fluid grace, tethered his horse, and approached cautiously, one hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Madam." His voice carried across the distance between them, deep and tinged with concern. "Are you all right?" Bethany tried again to speak, managing only a croak before a fit of coughing overtook her. The man moved quickly then, crossing the remaining distance in long strides. As he knelt beside her, she finally saw his face clearly weathered by sun and wind, with alert blue eyes that studied her with a mixture of wariness and compassion. "Here," he said, offering a canteen. "Small sips now." The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but to Bethany, it was sweeter than the finest champagne. She drank greedily until the man gently pulled the canteen away. "Not too much at once," he cautioned. "You'll make yourself sick." Now that her immediate thirst was quenched, Bethany could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. A thin scar ran along his jawline, pale against his tanned skin. "Thank you," she managed, her voice still raspy. "I thought I was going to die out here." The man's expression remained serious as he assessed her condition. "You're a fair ways from anywhere, miss. What happened to you?" In halting sentences, Bethany explained about the stagecoach attack, her dead relatives, and her desperate attempt to reach their homestead. As she spoke, the man's face darkened with anger. "Stagecoach robbers," he muttered. "Been a rash of them lately. Low-life scum." He removed his hat, revealing more of his face. "Name's Kieran Young, miss. I run cattle about 15 miles west of here." "Bethany Zimmerman," she replied, attempting to straighten her disheveled appearance. I was on my way to live with my uncle and aunt near Cheyenne." Kieran nodded grimly. "I know the area. Your uncle's place, would that be the new homestead claim near Willow Creek?" Hope flared in Bethany's chest. "Yes, that's the one. My uncle mentioned a creek in his letters." "It's about a day's ride from here," Kieran said, looking at the sky to gauge the time. "But you're in no condition to travel far today. My ranch is closer. We should get you there, get you some proper food and rest." Bethany hesitated, acutely aware of the impropriety of accompanying a strange man to his home. But her options were non-existent, and death from exposure was a certainty if she refused. Seeming to read her thoughts, Kieran added, "My housekeeper, Mrs. Donnelly, lives at the ranch. Proper as they come and twice as fierce. You'll be safe there, Miss Zimmerman. You have my word." Relief washed over Bethany. "Thank you, Mr. Young. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Out here we help each other survive, miss. That's payment enough." He rose to his feet and offered her his hand. "Think you can stand?" Bethany took his calloused hand and attempted to rise, but her legs buckled beneath her. Before she could fall, Kieran caught her, his strong arms steadying her against his chest. For a moment they stood like that, Bethany acutely aware of his proximity and the strange comfort she found in it. "Sorry," she mumbled, embarrassed by her weakness. "Nothing to apologize for," he replied, his voice gentler than before. "You've been through hell." With careful movements, he helped her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that eyed her curiously. "This is Thunder," Kieran said, patting the horse's neck. "Best mount in the territory." He lifted Bethany onto the saddle with surprising ease, then gathered her carpet bag and secured it behind the saddle. "What about you?" Bethany asked as he adjusted the stirrups for her. "I'll walk alongside," he answered simply. "It's not far." As they set off across the prairie, Bethany felt the first stirrings of hope since the attack. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, casting golden light across the endless grass. From her elevated position on Thunder's back, the world seemed less threatening, especially with Kieran's steady presence beside her. They traveled in comfortable silence for a while, Bethany occasionally taking small sips from Kieran's canteen when he offered it. Eventually, curiosity got the better of her. "Have you lived here long, Mr. Young?" Kieran glanced up at her, shielding his eyes from the sun. "6 years now. Came west after the war with nothing but thunder and the clothes on my back." "The war?" Bethany asked, though she knew instantly which one he meant. "Served with the Union," Kieran replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "Pennsylvania cavalry. When it was over, couldn't stomach going back to normal life back east. Too many ghosts." He paused as if surprised by his own candor. "What about you, Miss Zimmerman? What brings a Boston lady to Wyoming Territory?" Bethany sighed, the pain of her recent losses still raw. "My parents died last winter. Influenza. They left some money, but not enough to maintain our home. My uncle wrote offering me a place with them. He said the West was a land of new beginnings." "That it is," Kieran agreed. "Hard beginnings, often enough, but new ones all the same." As they crested a gentle rise, Bethany gasped. Below them, nestled in a verdant valley where several streams converged, stood a ranch. It wasn't large by the standards she'd heard of, nothing like the vast cattle empires of Texas, but it was neat and well-tended. A sturdy log house formed the centerpiece, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged around it. Smoke curled from the chimney, and even from this distance, Bethany could see cattle grazing in the pastures beyond. "Welcome to the Lazy Y," Kieran said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's not much, but it's mine." "It's beautiful," Bethany breathed and meant it. After days of terror and exposure on the open prairie, the ranch looked like paradise. As they approached, a door opened in the main house and a stout woman in an apron emerged, shading her eyes against the setting sun. When she spotted them, she hurried down the path. "Kieran Young." She called, her Irish accent thick with concern. "What's this then? Who have you got there?" "Trouble, Mrs. Donnelly," Kieran called back. "The kind that needs your help." The woman, presumably the housekeeper Kieran had mentioned, hurried toward them, her face a mixture of curiosity and concern. As they drew closer, Bethany could see she was in her 50s, with gray streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Stagecoach attack survivor," Kieran explained as he helped Bethany down from Thunder. "Miss Bethany Zimmerman from Boston. Been on her own for 3 days." Mrs. Donnelly's expression softened immediately. "Lord above, you poor child." She took Bethany's arm, supporting her with surprising strength. "Come inside this instant. You need food, a bath, and proper rest in that order." Bethany glanced back at Kieran, suddenly reluctant to leave his reassuring presence. "Go on," he said with a nod. "Mrs. Donnelly will take good care of you. I need to see to Thunder and check on things at the barn. I'll be in for supper." With that, he led the horse away, leaving Bethany in Mrs. Donnelly's capable hands. The housekeeper clucked sympathetically as she guided Bethany toward the house. "3 days alone on the prairie," she muttered. "It's a wonder you're alive, miss, but you're safe now, and that's what matters." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and clean, polished surfaces. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting warm light throughout the main room. Mrs. Donnelly led Bethany to a wooden chair near the fire. "Sit here while I heat water for your bath," she instructed. "I'll bring you some tea and bread to tide you over." Too exhausted to protest, Bethany sank into the chair, grateful for its solid support. The events of the past few days crashed over her in waves, and now that she was finally safe, the tears she'd been holding back flowed freely. Mrs. Donnelly returned with a steaming cup and a plate of bread slathered with butter and honey. Seeing Bethany's tears, she set the food aside and knelt before her. "There now, lass," she said gently. "You've a right to your grief, but remember you're alive. That's no small thing." Bethany nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know, it's just, everything happened so fast. One moment we were traveling, the next, everyone was dead, and I was alone." "Not alone anymore," Mrs. Donnelly said firmly. "Now eat something while I prepare your bath." The simple food revived Bethany's spirits somewhat. By the time Mrs. Donnelly returned to announce the bath was ready, she felt steadier, though still weak from her ordeal. The bath had been prepared in a small room off the kitchen, a large copper tub filled with steaming water that smelled faintly of lavender. Mrs. Donnelly helped Bethany undress, tutting over her blistered feet and the bruises that marked her pale skin. "We'll need to tend to these," she said, examining a particularly angry-looking blister. "But the bath first. It'll help with the soreness." The water was heaven against Bethany's abused body. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink deeper, the warmth penetrating her aching muscles. Mrs. Donnelly provided soap and a cloth, then discreetly withdrew, promising to find her some clean clothes. Alone for the first time since Kieran had found her, Bethany reflected on her extraordinary reversal of fortune. That morning, she had been certain she would die on the prairie. Now she was safe, warm and cared for by strangers who asked nothing in return for their kindness. And then there was Kieran Young himself, a man unlike any she had known in Boston. There was a quiet strength about him, a self-sufficiency tempered with compassion that Bethany found both intriguing and comforting. She had known him only hours, yet already she felt she could trust him with her life. Indeed, she already had. After her bath, dressed in a simple cotton dress that Mrs. Donnelly had altered hastily to fit her smaller frame, Bethany felt almost human again. Her damp hair hung in loose waves down her back as she sat at the kitchen table, watching the housekeeper prepare supper. "Has Mr. Young always lived alone?" Bethany asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Mrs. Donnelly glanced up from the stew she was stirring. 6 years he's been here. Built this place up from nothing, he did. Good man, Mr. Young, but carries his burdens close to his chest." "He mentioned serving in the war." "Aye," Mrs. Donnelly nodded. "Doesn't speak of it much, but I know it left its mark on him. Most men came back changed if they came back at all." She sprinkled herbs into the pot. "My own husband didn't. Left Ireland to fight for the Union, he did. Buried somewhere in Virginia now." "I'm sorry," Bethany said softly. Mrs. Donnelly waved away her sympathy. "Long time ago now. But Mr. Young, he needs someone in his life besides an old widow and his ranch hands. Too much solitude isn't good for a man's soul." Before Bethany could respond, the door opened and Kieran entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. He had removed his hat and vest, and his dark hair was damp, as if he'd washed up before coming in. "Something smells good, Mrs. Donnelly," he said, nodding to both women. His eyes lingered on Bethany, taking in her transformed appearance. "You're looking better, Miss Zimmerman." Bethany felt a flush creep into her cheeks under his gaze. "Thanks to your hospitality, Mr. Young, and please call me Bethany." A small smile touched his lips. "Kieran, then." Mrs. Donnelly bustled between them, setting the table with practiced efficiency. "Sit down, both of you. Supper's ready, and Miss Bethany needs her strength." The meal was simple but delicious: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple preserves. Bethany hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her. She ate with as much decorum as she could muster, though her Boston manners warred with her desperate appetite. Conversation flowed easily, with Mrs. Donnelly doing most of the talking. She told stories of Ireland, of her journey to America, and of the early days of the Lazy Y when she had arrived to find Kieran living in a one-room cabin with only thunder for company. "Wild as the land itself, he was," she said fondly. "Barely knew how to cook anything that wasn't charred black on the outside and raw in the middle." Kieran accepted her teasing with good grace. "I'd have starved without you, Mrs. Donnelly, and that's the truth." As the meal progressed, Bethany found herself studying Kieran when he wasn't looking. There was a quiet confidence about him, a self-contained strength that drew her. When he did speak, his words were thoughtful and direct, without the flowery embellishments or empty platitudes she'd grown accustomed to from Boston gentlemen. After supper, Mrs. Donnelly shooed Kieran away from the dishes. "You two go sit by the fire. Miss Bethany can tell you her plans while I tidy up." In the main room, Kieran added wood to the fire while Bethany settled into a chair, tucking her legs beneath her. The flames cast dancing shadows across the room, creating an atmosphere of intimate warmth. "Mrs. Donnelly seems determined that we should talk," Bethany observed with a small smile. Kieran chuckled, taking the chair opposite hers. "She means well. Gets lonely out here sometimes, especially for a woman used to city life." He studied Bethany across the firelight. "Speaking of which, what are your plans now? Still set on reaching your uncle's homestead?" Bethany's smile faded. "I don't know. There's nothing for me there now except empty land. I don't even know if I legally have any claim to it." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I have some money saved, but not enough to return to Boston. And even if I could, there's nothing for me there either. No family back east, friends, none close enough to impose upon." Bethany stared into the fire, watching the flames consume the wood. "It seems my options are rather limited." Kieran was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You could stay here," he said finally. "At least until you decide what you want to do. Mrs. Donnelly would welcome the company, and there's plenty of room." Bethany looked up, surprised by the offer. "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," Kieran interrupted. "Like I said earlier, out here we help each other. Besides," he hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I feel responsible for you now. I'd rest easier knowing you were safe." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Bethany. In Boston, she had been courted by men with polished manners and practiced compliments. None had affected her the way this straightforward cowboy did with his simple honesty. "Thank you," she said softly. "I accept your offer, at least for now." Something like relief passed across Kieran's face. "Good, that's settled then." He rose from his chair. "I should turn in. Dawn comes early on a ranch. Mrs. Donnelly has prepared the spare room for you upstairs." As he moved toward the door that presumably led to his own quarters, Bethany called after him. "Kieran," he turned, one eyebrow raised in question. "Thank you," she said again. "Not just for the room, but for finding me today, for saving my life." His expression softened. "Get some rest, Bethany." Tomorrow will be a better day." With that, he was gone, leaving Bethany alone with the crackling fire and the strange new feeling stirring within her heart. The following days established a rhythm to life at the Lazy Y. Bethany, still weak from her ordeal, spent the first day mostly resting, though by afternoon she insisted on helping Mrs. Donnelly with household tasks. The housekeeper showed her how to make bread the Western way, with sourdough starter instead of store-bought yeast, and taught her to churn butter from the cream provided by the ranch's small dairy herd. Kieran was absent most of the day, returning only for meals, his face weathered by sun and wind. He spoke little of his work, but Bethany gathered from his conversations with the ranch hands who occasionally joined them for meals that autumn was a busy time, with cattle to be moved to winter pastures and preparations to be made for the harsh Wyoming winter ahead. On her third day at the ranch, Bethany awoke feeling stronger than she had since the stagecoach attack. After breakfast, she approached Kieran as he was preparing to head out for the day. "I'd like to see the ranch," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "If you wouldn't mind showing me around, that is." Kieran looked surprised, then pleased. "I was planning to ride the north pasture today. It's not too far. Think you're up for it?" "I believe so," Bethany replied, though inwardly she wondered if her still healing blisters would withstand a day on horseback. Mrs. Donnelly, overhearing their conversation, bustled into the room with a pair of worn leather boots. "These belonged to my niece when she visited last summer," she explained, handing them to Bethany. "They should fit you better than those city shoes you were wearing." The boots were sturdy and practical, if a bit scuffed. Bethany accepted them gratefully, slipping them on to find they fit remarkably well. "And you'll be needing these," Mrs. Donnelly continued, producing a pair of denim trousers and a flannel shirt. Seeing Bethany's shocked expression, she added, "No lady can ride properly in skirts, especially not out here. My niece left these behind as well." Kieran suppressed a smile at Bethany's scandalized expression. Mrs. Donnelly's right. Practical clothing is more important than propriety on the frontier. Half an hour later, dressed in her borrowed clothes with her hair braided down her back, Bethany met Kieran at the corral. She felt strange in the trousers, exposed in a way that was both liberating and terrifying. In Boston, such attire would have caused an absolute scandal. If Kieran found her appearance unusual, he gave no sign of it. Instead, he introduced her to a gentle mare named Daisy, showing her how to saddle and bridle the horse with patient instruction. "You've ridden before?" he asked as he adjusted the stirrups. "In the city parks, yes," Bethany admitted, "but never like this, out in the open." Kieran's smile was reassuring. "Daisy will take good care of you. She knows this land as well as I do." As they rode out from the ranch, Bethany felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. The vastness of the Wyoming landscape stretched before them, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains that shimmered blue on the horizon. The sky above was an endless expanse of clear azure, unmarred by the smoke and buildings of the city. Kieran rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the land. He showed her where the property boundaries lay, marked by nothing more than natural features like a distinctive rock formation or a bend in a creek. "How do you remember it all?" Bethany asked, genuinely curious. "In Boston, everything is marked and mapped." "You learn to read the land," Kieran replied. "After a while, it's as clear as street signs." They stopped to rest by a small stream around midday. Kieran spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree and produced a lunch that Mrs. Donnelly had packed: bread, cheese, dried beef, and apples. As they ate, Bethany found herself studying Kieran's profile against the backdrop of the wild landscape. He seemed so at ease here, so connected to the land in a way she had never experienced. "What made you choose this place?" she asked. "Out of all the West, why here?" Kieran considered the question, his gaze distant. "I was riding north from Colorado, no particular destination in mind. Came to this valley in spring when the wildflowers were blooming and the grass was green as emeralds." He gestured toward the stream. "I made camp by this very creek, and when I woke the next morning I knew I'd found home." "Just like that," Bethany marveled. "Just like that," he confirmed with a small smile. "Sometimes the heart recognizes home before the mind does." His words resonated with Bethany in a way she hadn't expected. Since arriving at the Lazy Y, she had felt a growing sense of belonging, despite the ranch being so different from anything she had known before. "What about you?" Kieran asked, breaking into her thoughts. "What was Boston like?" Bethany tried to put into words the city she had known all her life. She told him about the cobblestone streets, the grand houses of Beacon Hill, the Boston Common in spring when the trees bloomed. She spoke of concerts and lectures, of bookshops and tea rooms, of the life she had led as the daughter of a moderately successful merchant. "It sounds beautiful," Kieran said when she finished, "but confined, somehow." "It was," Bethany admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "I never realized how confined until now. Here, even with all the dangers, there's a freedom I never knew existed." Kieran's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a shared understanding that transcended words. For a moment, Bethany felt as if he could see into her very soul, past the proper Boston lady to the woman beneath who yearned for something more. The moment was broken when thunder snorted and stamped, drawing Kieran's attention. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "What is it?" Bethany asked, alarmed by the sudden tension in his body. "Not sure," Kieran murmured, scanning the surrounding countryside. "But thunder senses something." Bethany stood as well, her heart racing. She had almost forgotten the dangers that had brought her to the Lazy Y in the first place. A movement on the ridge above them caught her eye. "There," she whispered, pointing. Kieran followed her gaze. 3 riders had appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the sky. They remained motionless for a long moment, clearly observing Kieran and Bethany. "Get behind me," Kieran said quietly, drawing his revolver. Bethany did as she was told, fear crawling up her spine. "Who are they?" "Could be anyone," Kieran replied, his voice tight. "Travelers, neighboring ranchers, or bandits." The riders began to descend the ridge, moving directly toward them. As they drew closer, Bethany could make out more details: all men, roughly dressed, with bandanas covering the lower portions of their faces. "Bandits," Kieran confirmed grimly. "Same ones that hit the stagecoach, most likely." "How can you tell?" Bethany asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "The red bandanas. Gang that's been operating in these parts wears them as a calling card." Kieran's expression hardened. "They must have spotted us from the ridge." The riders were close enough now that Bethany could see the gleam of weapons in their hands. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, memories of the stagecoach attack flashing through her mind, the gunshots, the screams, the blood. "When I say run," Kieran said, his voice low and urgent, "get on Daisy and ride hard for the ranch. Don't look back, don't slow down for anything." "I can't leave you," Bethany protested. "You can and you will," Kieran replied, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll hold them off, give you a head start." Before Bethany could object further, the lead rider called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "Well, well, what have we here? A cowboy and his lady friend out for a picnic." Kieran's grip on his revolver tightened. "That's close enough," he shouted back. "This is Lazy Y land. You're trespassing." The riders continued their approach, slowing but not stopping. "We're just passing through, friend," the leader called, his tone falsely jovial. "But now that we're here, maybe the lady would like to join us for a spell. We could show her a real good time." Bethany felt sick at the implication in his words. Beside her, Kieran's body tensed like a coiled spring. "Last warning," Kieran said, his voice deadly calm. "Turn around and ride away." The bandits exchanged glances, clearly assessing the situation. 3 against 1 should have been favorable odds, but something in Kieran's stance, the unwavering steadiness of his gun hand, the cold determination in his eyes gave them pause. The leader made a show of considering the ultimatum. "All right, Cowboy, no need for bloodshed today." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Madam, sorry to miss the pleasure of your company." As the bandits wheeled their horses around, the leader added, "We'll be seeing you again, I expect, sooner rather than later." They rode away at an unhurried pace, occasionally glancing back as if to memorize Kieran and Bethany's appearances. Only when they had disappeared over the ridge did Kieran lower his gun, though the tension didn't leave his body. "We need to get back to the ranch," he said, holstering his weapon. Now, they packed up their picnic in silence, both acutely aware of how quickly their peaceful day had turned dangerous. As they mounted their horses, Bethany couldn't stop herself from scanning the horizon, half expecting the bandits to reappear at any moment. "Will they come back?" she asked as they rode swiftly toward the ranch. Kieran's expression was grim. "Eventually. Men like that don't take kindly to being turned away from what they want, and what they want is whatever they can take," Kieran replied simply. "Cattle, horses, supplies. You." The blunt assessment sent a chill through Bethany. "What will we do?" "Be prepared," Kieran said. "I'll alert the hands, double the watch. The ranch is defensible if we know they're coming." They rode the rest of the way in tense silence, pushing their horses to a pace just short of dangerous. Bethany's muscles protested the unaccustomed activity, but fear proved a powerful motivator. When they finally reached the ranch, Kieran immediately called the hands together. Bethany counted 5 men in total, including Kieran himself, not a large force if the bandits returned in greater numbers. While Kieran briefed his men, Bethany sought out Mrs. Donnelly, finding the housekeeper in the kitchen preparing dinner. "We ran into trouble," Bethany explained, her voice shaking slightly as she recounted their encounter. Mrs. Donnelly's normally cheerful face grew serious. "The Red Bandana Gang," she said, nodding. "They've been a plague on these parts for months now. Sheriff's been chasing them, but they know the country too well." She patted Bethany's hand reassuringly. "Don't you worry, though. Mr. Young won't let anything happen to you or to any of us." Despite Mrs. Donnelly's confidence, dinner that evening was a subdued affair. Kieran ate quickly, his mind clearly on the preparations still to be made. When he excused himself to check the perimeter again, Bethany followed him to the door. "Kieran," she said softly, "I'm sorry my presence has brought danger to your home." He turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "This isn't your fault, Bethany. Those men were trouble long before you arrived." His face softened. "Besides, I couldn't have left you out there on the prairie." "I'd make the same choice again, danger or no." The sincerity in his voice made Bethany's heart flutter strangely. "Still, I feel responsible. I wish there was something I could do to help." Kieran considered her for a moment. "Can you shoot?" The question caught Bethany off guard. "I've never held a gun in my life." "Then it's time you learned," Kieran said decisively. "Tomorrow morning, first light." True to his word, Kieran woke Bethany before dawn the next day. The air was crisp with autumn chill as they made their way to a clearing behind the barn, where Kieran had set up several empty bottles on a fallen log. "This is a Colt revolver," he explained, showing her the weapon. 6 shots, reliable and not too heavy for your hands. With patient instruction, he taught her how to load the gun, how to hold it properly, and how to aim. Bethany listened attentively, trying to overcome her initial fear of the weapon. "Remember," Kieran said, positioning her arms, "the gun is just a tool. Respect it, but don't fear it." When it came time to fire, Bethany's first shot went wild, the recoil stronger than she had anticipated. But Kieran's steady presence beside her gave her confidence to try again. By her sixth shot, she had managed to graze one of the bottles, which Kieran declared a remarkable improvement. "You're a natural," he said, his eyes warm with approval. "A few more days of practice, and you'll be hitting targets consistently." Bethany flushed with pleasure at his praise. "I never imagined I could do something like this." "There's a lot of things you can do that you probably never imagined," Kieran replied, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. The shooting lessons continued daily, supplemented by practical instruction in ranch operations. Bethany learned to ride properly, to tend the kitchen garden with Mrs. Donnelly, and even to help with the gentler livestock. Each new skill built her confidence, transforming her from the terrified woman Kieran had found on the prairie into someone stronger, more capable. In the evenings, they would often sit by the fire, Kieran teaching her to play checkers or simply talking about their lives. He told her more about his experiences during the war, about the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him, about his journey west seeking peace. In return, Bethany shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of her parents' kindness and the dreams she had harbored before their deaths. As the days passed, Bethany became increasingly aware of her growing feelings for Kieran. It wasn't just gratitude for her rescue, though that remained. It was deeper an appreciation for his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the gentle way he treated those in his care. When their hands accidentally touched over the checkerboard, or when she caught him watching her across the dinner table, her heart would race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. 2 weeks after her arrival at the Lazy Y, Bethany found herself alone with Mrs. Donnelly, helping to preserve the last of the season's apples before the first frost. "You've settled in well," the housekeeper observed, her hands deftly peeling an apple in one continuous spiral. "Hard to believe you're the same frightened girl Mr. Young brought home that day." Bethany smiled, concentrating on her own, less elegant peeling. "This place changes a person, or perhaps it simply reveals what was always there, beneath the surface." Mrs. Donnelly nodded approvingly. "Wise words for one so young." She glanced sidelong at Bethany, and Mr. Young, has he changed as well? Heat crept into Bethany's cheeks. "I wouldn't know. I didn't know him before." "Didn't you?" Mrs. Donnelly's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Well, I did. 6 years I've looked after that man, and I've never seen him smile so much as he has these past 2 weeks." She set down her knife, fixing Bethany with a direct gaze. "He cares for you, you know, more than he's allowing himself to admit." Bethany's heart skipped a beat. "Mrs. Donnelly, no need to say anything to me, dear," the housekeeper interrupted gently. "But life out here is uncertain. If there's something worth saying, best not to wait too long to say it." Before Bethany could respond, the door opened and Kieran entered, his expression unusually serious. "Mrs. Donnelly, could you excuse us?" he asked. "I need to speak with Bethany." The housekeeper nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'll just check on those pies in the oven," she said, tactfully withdrawing. Once they were alone, Kieran sat across from Bethany at the kitchen table. "I've had word from town," he said without preamble. "The sheriff's formed a posse to go after the red bandana gang. They've hit 2 more ranches since we saw them." A knot of dread formed in Bethany's stomach. "You're joining the posse." It wasn't a question, but Kieran nodded anyway. "I have to." These men are a threat to everyone in the territory, not just us." He hesitated, then added, "The sheriff also had news about your uncle's claim. According to the land office, as his only living relative, you're entitled to inherit it." Bethany absorbed this information slowly. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow at first light," Kieran replied. "The posse is gathering in town. We'll be gone a week, maybe more, depending on how far we have to track them." "A week," Bethany echoed, trying to hide her dismay. The ranch would feel empty without him, despite Mrs. Donnelly's company and the presence of the remaining hands. "I wouldn't go if I didn't have to," Kieran said, his voice softening. "But it's the only way to ensure long-term safety for the ranch. And for you." Bethany met his gaze, seeing the conflict, their duty warring with something else, something he wasn't ready or able to express. "I understand," she said simply, "and I'll be here when you return." Relief crossed Kieran's face, followed by something that might have been tenderness. "I was hoping you'd say that." The dawn came too quickly. Bethany rose before the sun, determined to see Kieran off properly. She found him in the stable, saddling Thunder and checking his supplies one last time. "You're up early," he observed, though he didn't seem surprised to see her. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," Bethany replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Kieran secured the last strap on his saddle and turned to face her fully. In the lantern light, his features seemed more defined, the planes of his face cast in shadow and gold. "Bethany," he began, then stopped, as if unsure how to continue. She waited, her heart pounding in her chest. "Be careful while I'm gone," he said finally. "Williams and Jeffers will stay behind to protect the ranch, but if there's any sign of trouble, any at all, head for the root cellar. There's a hidden compartment there with supplies and weapons." Bethany nodded, unable to ignore the disappointment that flooded through her. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that he might say something more personal, something that acknowledged the growing connection between them. "I will," she promised. "And you be careful too. Those men are dangerous." "I've faced worse," Kieran said with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and uncertain feelings. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Bethany stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Come back safely," she whispered. "Please." Kieran's expression softened, and for a moment Bethany thought he might pull her into his arms. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, his touch warm and reassuring. "I will," he promised, his voice husky with emotion. Then he was mounting Thunder, tipping his hat to her one last time and riding away from the ranch, a solitary figure against the lightening sky. The days following Kieran's departure were the longest of Bethany's life. She threw herself into ranch work, helping Mrs. Donnelly with household tasks, and even assisting the remaining hands with lighter outdoor chores. Each night, she practiced loading and unloading the revolver Kieran had left for her, determined to be prepared if danger came. On the fourth day, a rider approached the ranch, not Kieran, but a young man from town bearing a letter. The sheriff's posse had tracked the bandits to the mountains and expected to engage them soon. The letter, dictated by Kieran to the town schoolteacher, was brief and formal, expressing hope that all was well at the ranch and promising to return as soon as possible. He didn't want to write it himself, Bethany asked the messenger, unable to hide her disappointment. The young man shrugged. "The teacher said Mr. Young's hand was bandaged. Cut it on some rocks while tracking, I guess." This news worried Bethany more than she cared to admit. A minor injury could become serious in the wilderness, especially if the posse engaged in a gunfight with the bandits. That night, sleep eluded her. She stood by her bedroom window, staring out at the vast, starlit prairie, wondering where Kieran was at that moment. Was he safe? Was he thinking of her as she was thinking of him? A movement in the darkness caught her eye, a brief flash of light near the corral, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Bethany strained to see through the darkness, her pulse quickening. There it was again, a lantern, quickly covered. And not carried by anyone who belonged at the Lazy Y. Fear and determination warred within her. Mrs. Donnelly was asleep in her room off the kitchen. The two ranch hands, Williams and Jeffers, were in the bunkhouse, some distance from the main house. By the time she alerted them, it might be too late. Moving silently, Bethany retrieved the revolver from her bedside drawer and checked that it was loaded, just as Kieran had taught her. Then she crept downstairs, avoiding the steps that creaked, and positioned herself by a window that overlooked the corral. In the pale moonlight, she could make out 3 figures moving among the horses, the red bandana gang, or at least some of its members, taking advantage of the ranch's reduced defenses to steal livestock. Bethany's first instinct was to hide, to barricade herself in the root cellar as Kieran had instructed. But these men had killed her aunt and uncle, had left her to die on the prairie, and now they were stealing from the man who had saved her life. Something hardened within her, a resolve that surprised her with its intensity. Taking a deep breath, she opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, revolver raised. "Get away from those horses," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now." The thieves froze, then turned toward her voice. In the dim light, she could see their red bandanas, confirming her suspicions. "Well, look who it is," one of them drawled, the leader from their encounter on the range. "The cowboy's woman, all alone and trying to be brave." "I'm not alone," Bethany bluffed, "and I know how to use this gun." The men exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. "Pretty little thing like you," the leader scoffed. "I doubt you've ever fired a shot in anger. Would you like to test that theory?" Bethany asked, cocking the hammer as Kieran had shown her. The sound echoed in the night air, giving the bandits pause. "But only for a moment. Take her," the leader ordered. "We'll have some fun before we finish looting this place." As the men started toward her, Bethany aimed at the ground near their feet and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the quiet night, and one of the bandits yelped as dirt and stone fragments sprayed his legs. "The next one won't miss," Bethany warned, her hands now shaking with adrenaline. Before the bandits could respond, a shout came from the direction of the bunkhouse. Williams and Jeffers had heard the shot and were running toward the house, their own weapons drawn. "Boss," one of the bandits called urgently. "We got company." The leader hesitated, clearly weighing his options. With a curse, he signaled his men to retreat. "This isn't over, lady," he called to Bethany as they mounted their horses. "Not by a long shot." They galloped away into the night, leaving behind the horses they had been attempting to steal. Williams and Jeffers arrived moments later, finding Bethany still standing on the porch, the revolver clutched in her trembling hands. "Miss Zimmerman," Williams exclaimed, "are you hurt?" Bethany shook her head, the reality of what had just happened beginning to sink in. "They were trying to steal the horses," she explained, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. I stopped them." "You sure did," Jeffers said, respect evident in his tone. "That was mighty brave, miss." Mrs. Donnelly appeared in the doorway, hastily wrapped in a shawl. "What in heaven's name is happening out here?" As Williams explained the situation, Bethany found herself guided inside, a blanket placed around her shoulders and a cup of tea pressed into her hands. The shock was setting in now, making her fingers numb and her thoughts scattered. "You could have been killed," Mrs. Donnelly scolded gently, though her eyes shone with pride. "What would Mr. Young say if he came back to find you gone?" "He'd say I did what needed doing," Bethany replied, surprised by her own certainty. "Just as he would have." The remainder of the night passed in tense vigilance, with Williams and Jeffers taking turns standing watch. By morning, there had been no further sign of the bandits, but none of them doubted they would return and in greater numbers. "We need to send word to the sheriff's posse," Williams decided over breakfast. "Let them know the gang split up, with some still in the area." "I'll ride to town," Jeffers volunteered. "Should be back by nightfall if I push hard." Bethany spent the day in a state of heightened awareness, jumping at every sound, her hand never far from the revolver that now seemed a permanent extension of her arm. When Jeffers hadn't returned by sunset, her anxiety only increased. "Something's wrong," she said to Mrs. Donnelly as they prepared a simple supper. "He should have been back by now." The housekeeper's normally cheerful face was drawn with worry. "The road to town crosses open country. If the bandits were watching—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Bethany understood all too well what might have happened to Jeffers if he'd been intercepted. As darkness fell, Williams insisted on moving everyone to the main house, which was more defensible than the scattered-out buildings. They barricaded the doors and windows as best they could, setting up a makeshift alarm system of tin cans strung on wire across the approaches to the house. "Get some rest," Williams advised Bethany and Mrs. Donnelly. "I'll take first watch, wake you if anything happens." Bethany tried to sleep, but every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind against the windows, had her reaching for her gun. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion finally claimed her, dragging her into a fitful slumber filled with dreams of gunfire and pursuit. She woke to the sound of horses, many horses approaching the ranch. Sunlight streamed through the windows. She had slept longer than intended. Grabbing her revolver, Bethany hurried downstairs to find Williams and Mrs. Donnelly already at the windows, peering out cautiously. "Is it them?" Bethany asked, her throat dry with fear. Williams shook his head, a smile breaking across his weathered face. "It's the boss, and looks like he brought the whole posse with him." Relief flooded through Bethany, so intense she had to lean against the wall for support. She moved to the window, eager for a glimpse of Kieran. He rode at the head of a group of about 15 men, his posture straight and proud in the saddle. Even from a distance, Bethany could see that his left hand was indeed bandaged, just as the messenger had said. But he was alive, whole, and returning to her. Williams unbarred the door, and the three of them stepped onto the porch as the riders approached. Bethany's eyes were fixed on Kieran, drinking in the sight of him after a week of worry and fear. When he saw her standing there, something in his expression changed. Relief mingled with something deeper, more intense. He dismounted quickly, handing Thunder's reins to another rider, and strode toward the house. "Bethany," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "are you all right?" "We met Jeffers on the road. He told us what happened." "I'm fine," she assured him, fighting the urge to throw herself into his arms. "We all are, but what about you, your hand?" Kieran glanced down at his bandaged hand as if he'd forgotten about the injury. "It's nothing. A scratch." His eyes searched her face. "Jeffers said you faced down the bandits alone. That was incredibly dangerous, Bethany." "I did what needed doing," she replied, echoing her words to Mrs. Donnelly. A ghost of a smile touched Kieran's lips. "So you did." He turned to include Williams and Mrs. Donnelly in the conversation. "We tracked the main gang to their hideout in the mountains. There was a fight. Their leader and several others were killed, the rest captured." "What about the ones who came here?" Williams asked. "3 men split from the main group," Kieran explained. "We're tracking them now. Sheriff thinks they're headed for the territorial border, trying to escape." The sheriff himself approached then, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest. "Miss Zimmerman, I'm Sheriff Tanner. I'd like to hear your account of what happened here, if you don't mind." The next hour was spent giving statements and answering questions. The posse would rest briefly at the ranch before continuing their pursuit of the remaining bandits. Throughout it all, Bethany was acutely aware of Kieran's presence, the way his eyes followed her movements, the protective stance he adopted whenever he stood near her. When the formal business was concluded, Kieran drew Bethany aside. "Walk with me," he asked, nodding toward the garden behind the house. They strolled in silence for a moment, the autumn sun warm on their faces despite the crisp air. Finally, Kieran spoke. "I shouldn't have left you," he said, his voice low and intense. "If anything had happened to you." "Nothing did," Bethany reminded him gently. "And you had to go. Those men needed to be stopped." Kieran nodded, his expression still troubled. "When Jeffers told us what happened, all I could think was that I might never see you again, never tell you." He trailed off, seeming to struggle with his words. Bethany's heart raced. "Tell me what, Kieran?" He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "That I love you, Bethany. That somehow, in these few short weeks, you've become the most important person in my life." His unbandaged hand reached for hers, his touch gentle but sure. "I know it's too soon. I know you have options now with your uncle's land and all, but I had to tell you before." Bethany silenced him by placing her fingers against his lips. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "And I don't want options. I want you, Kieran Young. I love you too." For a moment, he seemed unable to believe what he was hearing. Then, with a sound that was half laugh, half sigh, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. The kiss was everything Bethany had imagined and more tender yet passionate, a perfect expression of the feelings that had been growing between them since that first day on the prairie. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Stay here, make a life with me. It won't be easy, ranching never is, but I swear I'll do everything in my power to make you happy." Tears of joy sprang to Bethany's eyes. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Kieran's smile was radiant as he kissed her again, sealing their promise beneath the vast Wyoming sky. Word of their engagement spread quickly among the posse and ranch hands, with Mrs. Donnelly taking particular delight in saying she had known all along how things would turn out. The sheriff offered his congratulations and, as a wedding present of sorts, promised to personally ensure that Bethany's claim to her uncle's land was properly processed. "You could combine the properties," he suggested. "Make the Lazy Y one of the largest spreads in the county." As the day wore on, the atmosphere at the ranch transformed from one of vigilance to celebration. Mrs. Donnelly prepared a feast, insisting that an engagement, even one formed under such unusual circumstances, deserved proper recognition. That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Bethany reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. "A month ago I was lost and terrified," she mused, her head resting comfortably on Kieran's shoulder. "I thought my life was over before it had really begun." Kieran's arm tightened around her. "And now," Bethany smiled, looking out at the land that had become her home, "now I know it was just beginning. The real adventure was waiting for me here with you." In the weeks that followed, as autumn deepened toward winter, Bethany and Kieran began planning their future together. The remaining bandits were captured trying to cross into Dakota Territory, bringing final closure to the ordeal that had brought them together. With the threat removed, they rode together to survey her uncle's land, a fertile stretch of prairie with a creek running through it, just as he had described in his letters. Standing there, Bethany felt a bittersweet connection to the relatives she had lost, a sense that their dream would live on through her in a way they might never have imagined. "We'll build something good here," Kieran promised, his arm around her waist as they gazed across the land that was now theirs, something that would make them proud. Their wedding took place on a crisp December day, with the mountains dusted in snow and the prairie stretching endlessly beneath a clear blue sky. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by Mrs. Donnelly, the ranch hands, and a few neighbors who had become friends. Bethany wore a simple white dress ordered from Cheyenne, with a crown of dried wildflowers that Mrs. Donnelly had preserved from the summer bloom. Kieran, standing tall and proud in his best clothes, watched her walk toward him with an expression of such love and wonder that Bethany felt her heart might burst with happiness. The preacher, who had ridden 3 days to perform the ceremony, spoke of love's resilience, of how the harshest conditions often gave rise to the strongest bonds. As Bethany and Kieran exchanged vows, their words carried across the wind swept Prairie promises not just of devotion, but of partnership, of building a life together in this wild, beautiful land. "I take you, Bethany, to be my wife," Kieran said, his voice clear and steady. "To share in all that life brings us, good and bad, easy and hard. I promise to stand by you, to protect you, to love you, for all the days of my life." Tears glistened in Bethany's eyes as she replied, "I take you, Kieran, to be my husband. To journey with you through whatever lies ahead, to be your partner, your friend, your love. I promise to stand strong beside you, to build our home with you, to love you, for all the days of my life." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from their small gathering. Mrs. Donnelly wiped tears from her eyes, while the ranch hands stamped their feet and whistled their approval. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing in the barn, which had been decorated with lanterns and evergreen boughs for the occasion. Bethany, whirling in Kieran's arms to the lively fiddle music, felt a sense of belonging she had never known in Boston. Later, as they stood alone on the porch of what was now their home, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, Kieran pulled Bethany close against the winter chill. "Happy?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Bethany nodded, nestling deeper into his embrace. "More than I ever thought possible." As winter settled over the lazy Y, Bethany and Kieran settled into married life with a naturalness that surprised them both. The days were filled with work tending livestock, mending equipment, preparing for spring planting on the expanded ranch. The nights were spent in each other's arms, discovering the deep intimacy that comes when two souls truly connect. Bethany flourished in her role as a rancher's wife, bringing her Boston education to bear on the ranch's books and correspondence, while eagerly learning the practical skills needed for frontier living. Kieran, for his part, found in Bethany not just a wife but a true partner, someone who understood his dreams for the land and shared his vision for their future. By spring, as the prairie burst into bloom with wildflowers and new grass, Bethany had news of her own to share. "A baby," Kieran whispered in wonder when she told him, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our child will grow up here free and strong." Bethany covered his hand with her own. "A child of the prairie," she agreed with a smile. "Born from love that began with fear, but grew into something beautiful and lasting." As they stood together in the doorway of their home, looking out at the land that had brought them together, the vast, wild, magnificent prairie that had once filled Bethany with terror, but now represented everything she held dear, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true place in the world. Not in the refined drawing rooms of Boston, but here, beneath the endless Wyoming sky, in the arms of the cowboy who had ridden into her life when she needed him most, offering not just rescue but a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives together.